Good morning, I'm WaywornWyrm, and welcome to my channel. And welcome back to Tales from Oberth. This will be episode 2, A Night at the Cracked Cup. The Cracked Cup was a small building that was not much bigger than most of the small houses in the hamlet, as the weary group was soon to realize as their two guides showed them to it. Above the door was a hanging sign that had a picture of a cup that was, unsurprisingly, cracked. No words or anything accompanied the sign, but that was not out of the norm. Reading was not something that could be expected among most people in such a small, out-of-the-way place. The door was pushed open to a warm and welcome sight. The large fire in one corner of the main room provided warmth, as well as prepared the food in a pot carefully hanging near, but not too near the flames. Several candles and lanterns placed throughout the room made sure to provide light through the whole room, especially along the single stone wall where the main counter was. Of the 4 roughly made wooden tables that were spread around the room, 3 of them currently had games of cards or chance going on them. As the group entered, an older, frail-looking woman with gray eyes and stringy dark brown hair looked at them before croaking out, "Who've you brought this time, Gerwig?" Asking the question to one of the guards. The young guard looked thoughtful at the woman for a second, before he started talking. "Good to see you too, Kaja. These fine folk just arrived here in town looking to talk with Harry. Since it's been pouring rain all day, they would like to get out of the weather, and we," he gestured at Landolf, the other guard, "figured this would be the best place to bring them." Kaja seemed to be mollified by the answer, and nodded. Landolf, the older of the 2 guards that had shown them to the tavern, looked at the group. "We'll leave you here. One of Harry's acolytes should be here in the morning to collect you. Good day." With that rather abrupt ending, the 2 men turned and braced themselves slightly as they re-entered the downpour outside, quickly becoming lost in the dark. After their escorts left, Hedwig turned back to the innkeeper, Kaja, and smiled, stepping forward. "Hello, I'm Hedwig, and this is—" she began before getting cut off abruptly. "I don't need to know your names. I imagine that by tomorrow you'll be gone. That'll be just fine by me. We've some pottage for 4 pennies a tankard. Mead will run you 3 pennies a mug, and some blankets in the spot near the fire will cost you 5 pennies a night." Hedwig smiled with all the honey she could muster in the face of the rather cross innkeeper. "Sure. So for all 3 of those will be a shilling? That's quite fine." Each member of the small party pulled out a shilling and placed it on the counter before taking the empty table and shrugging off any outer clothing they had, and rubbing their hands and arms together. As they settled in and watched Kaja prepare their meal, the noise level slowly went back to what they imagined it had been before they had entered. The mead was passable, if a bit on the yeasty side, and the pottage was quite mushy, but still it was a hot meal and did much to fill them. No one was surprised when Alberta sauntered her way over to one of the card games after she had finished eating. "What's the buy-in?" she asked, gesturing to an open seat. 6 pennies, a gruff man, who was apparently the dealer, at least for this round, said, nodding at the chair. Alberta smiled and took the seat, a shilling appearing in her hand as she did so. "Can anyone break this for me? I'm afraid I don't have any pennies." After much grumbling, one of the other men tossed 6 pennies into the pot and moved a stack of 6 more to Alberta, who handed him her shilling before the game began. Alberta managed to win that first hand, taking in 24 pennies. After that, she won the next 2 hands in a row, and the group of 3 kicked her out, almost convinced that somehow she was cheating. They weren't sure how. She was fine with that however, and sauntered back to the group. If we're still here tomorrow, I'll cover whatever fabulous fare they provide for dinner and a second night of accommodations. Hedwig shot her a look. Alberta, if you keep pulling shit like this, we'll end up like that man we saw earlier this morning. Alberta's smile faded a bit at that remark, remembering the man tarred and feathered. Before finally answering, clearly hurt. It's not my fault I'm better at cards than they are. You know, there is a decent chance that the reason they haven't done anything toward us yet is we're quite clearly armed well, and two of us are armored, Landolf began. I've a feeling that in a place like this, that's just not the norm. He looked to Carl for confirmation. Carl just shrugged. Quite possibly. Who knows? It's hard to tell after all. For all we know, there is some great adventurer who retired here with his sword of amazingness or something. Point there, Landolf said before they lapsed into silence again. For the rest of the evening, it was fairly clear that the group was not wanted in the tavern, or at least not welcome as part of the group making up the inhabitants of the building. But they had nowhere else to go, and everyone knew it. This unwelcome got to each member of the group to the point where Hedwig couldn't even read her book. Not only were they froze out by the people playing games, but Kaja seemed to ignore their corner of the room for the night once she'd cleared their table. It came as a relief several hours later as the people filed out and were not replaced by new people, and Kaja went through a door in the stone wall before coming out with a few piles of blankets. These are for you. I expect them in the same shape that I'm giving them in. If you move the tables, put them back in the morning. We open just after dawn, and I expect you to be up and dressed by the time we open. If you need more wood on the fire, there is some. She pointed to a pile of wood near the fire. Don't burn the place down. With that, she exited again through the door in the stone wall. Although their clothes had sort of dried, in the few hours they had been sitting in wet clothes in the tavern, they hadn't fully dried, and each person stripped down and set their clothes near the fire to dry. The main problem with this was the blankets were incredibly itchy. But that is what they had, so they settled down near the fire on a hard wooden floor. The upside of this is they'd be warm, and would have more than just their clothes to cover them. And the floor was somewhat more comfortable than cold, hard ground, or, even worse, the wet, muddy ground that they'd been dealing with the last few days. And really, truth be told, when it came right down to it, an itchy blanket was better than no blanket. They couldn't exactly afford blankets. Well, Kai probably could, but most of them couldn't. Thank you so much for listening to the second episode of Tales from Oberth. I hope you tune in 2 weeks for the next episode of Tales from Oberth, and make sure you tune in tomorrow for the next episode of The Pugilist. Thank you.